My name is Imran Mahmood and I am a novelist and a criminal barrister. So, how I got into writing is actually linked to my profession. So when you're a criminal barrister, you spend quite a lot of time in courts or in kind of waiting rooms, waiting for juries to come back with verdicts. Sometimes you're waiting for cases to get on. And if you've got a lot of time like I had, then you usually try and find some way of filling it. So it's a choice between reading the papers or reading a book. And I used to just sit there and compose stories for my own entertainment. Anyway, one day I was writing a closing speech in a criminal case for a defendant, a young guy who was accused of murder. And as I was writing it, it suddenly just occurred to me that there was an absurdity really there, because they're not his words, they're mine, and the way I see things and the way I express things are always going to be different from the way another person sees things and expresses them. And so that set me to thinking, and I wondered, what would it be like if a defendant or person accused of a crime wrote his own speech, and what are the things that would be important to him? How would he express it differently from the way I would? And so when I had my next bit of spare time, I sat down and I wrote a novel which was called You Don't Know Me, and that was from the perspective of a young black defendant who had been accused of murder. He'd sacked his counsel, his barrister in this book, and he had to deliver his own jury speech. And so the entire book is a jury speech given by this young man. And so that was the start of my writing career. I wrote it. I hadn't intended at that point for anybody to read it. It was just a thing I'd done for myself. But the kind of longer I went on with it, and the closer it became to becoming a full-length book. So it started off quite short, and then I was going through it. And it was kind of book length by the time I'd finished with it. And I thought, well, maybe what I could do is to send it off to a couple of agents to see whether they thought there was anything interesting in it, whether it was something that could be made into a proper novel. And so I sent it out with not that much hope, if I'm honest. I'd sent it out thinking I might get a couple of rejections, but I might get some feedback telling me what was wrong with it. And in the end, I was very lucky because I sent it off to 5 different agents. And in fact, choosing the agent is actually quite important. And so if you're thinking about writing as a career and you're thinking about choosing an agent, then the way you do it, the way I did it, was to find books which are similar to the ones that you've written or intend to write, and then find who the agents are who deal with and have dealt with those books. Because most publishers won't take what they call unsolicited manuscripts from you. They will only accept them from agents. And the reason for that is now they know that agents have already filleted out and filtered out anything which isn't any good or which doesn't fit the slate. Anyway, so I'd sent it off to 5 agents, and they all called me back to say that they wanted to see the rest of it, and I sent it off, and one of the agents signed me up. But that was really only the first in a kind of dozen steps to the eventual book, because from there, once the agent had it, the agent then wanted to go through it with me and make a whole load of changes to it and suggested kind of structural changes. So in other words, telling me really about the craft of writing, would say to me, if these chapters are too long, they need to be shorter. The chapters on the whole need to be roughly similar in terms of size. And tips about pace to try and make sure that the reader is engaged the whole time. So she was giving me all of these editorial comments, and we spent a year going through it and getting it right before it even went off to a publisher. And then came the next step, and that step is probably as hard as any of the other steps. And what I didn't know then, but know now, is that when you send a work off to a publisher, they will buy it on the basis of what they consider to be a commercial imperative. So if they think they can sell it, they'll buy it. They will only think they can sell it if it fits into a particular category. So if you write a book without any thought about genre, so you're not thinking about whether it's going to be a crime novel or a bit of literary fiction or young adult, if you just write a novel which is a story that you find interesting, the trouble the publishers have is that they will say, we don't know where this fits, so we don't know how to market it, and we know that bookshops won't buy it unless it falls into a particular category. And that was the problem with my book. When I'd written it, it didn't really fall into any category, not clearly anyway. It wasn't really crime fiction, it wasn't really true crime. It was kind of a mixture of both, and it had kind of some literary elements. And so that was my first big mistake. In the end, a publisher, which was Penguin Random House, took what I would describe as a punt on it. And there was a great editor there who wanted it and took it on. And when he did, he effectively reformulated it as a crime novel and cast me as a crime author. Particularly clever of him, because I'm a criminal barrister, so it was a really good fit, and that helps with marketing and brand building and all of the other things. So that was the second step, and that wasn't even the end of it, because once you do that, then the editor, your publisher, then wants to have his say about what happens to the book. So they have their own editorial comments, which are structural changes, and then once they've done that, they'll talk to you about the length of the novel, and again about pace to try and keep it interesting. Then there's another. Once you do that, and that could take a few months. Once you've gone through that process of editing, then there's another round of edits, and then there are what they call copy edits and proof edits, which are separate edits. And eventually the manuscript, which is what they call it when it's not quite in book form, goes off to to other readers and copy editors who'll go through it and check for spelling and typos, and to make sure it's consistent. So you might say in your book, for example, 3 weeks later something happened, and then further on in your book you might refer to it as a couple of weeks later something happened, and so you've got to make sure those things are consistent. Or if you said something happened on a Tuesday and then later on in the novel you called it a Friday, so you get somebody else to check that. And then finally, once you've gone through that whole process, you've got your novel, if you're lucky, and if you're very lucky like I was, you've got your novel in hardback, and then later in paperback, in audio, and because this book was quite a kind of oral tradition, really, because it was a speech. Who voiced it was quite important. We had an actor voicing it called Adam Deacon, who's been in lots of films, and he was chosen because his voice was right for it, because we were representing a young man who was speaking in a voice which is totally different from mine. So it was in audio and it was in ebook, and then we've got the book in its physical incarnation there and ready, and it goes off to market, and then we keep our fingers crossed and hope it sells. But that still isn't the final say in it, because then you have to go to all these festivals, talk about your book, go on the radio, write articles to be interviewed by the newspapers about your book, so talk to bloggers so that they can carry on this kind of marketing pressure to help what they call build a brand for the author, so that if there's another book in you, then they can use what's happened before to propel what's about to come. And that is the journey to my writing career. That's how it all started. To be a fiction writer, so if you're writing fiction, I think you've got to love storytelling. You've got to love the idea of a story and what it can do. The great thing about storytelling is that you can take an important idea or concept or something you feel very strongly about, and you can put your own voice into it, your own opinions can kind of support it, and you can convey that message to a lot of people without it feeling as if you're lecturing them. So, like, take, for example, race. Let's say that's something that you feel very strongly about, or justice or morality. Then you can create a story which explores those issues, and you can bring home your point in a way which not only doesn't lecture somebody, but also in a way which stays with people. And I think that's has always been one of the strengths of storytelling, is that it can communicate this message about history and about what's going on around you, and it can do it in a way which is memorable. So I think you've got to love the idea of telling a story. You've got to love, the kind of nuts and bolts of it, which is reading. So if you can read, and read widely, then that will help for lots of reasons. One is that if you read lots of different things, you might be able to tell what kind of thing you might be best at, because not everybody's good at everything. I'm not a horror fiction writer. I don't think I could be, or a young adult fiction writer, or a historical fiction writer. But some people, they'll read those kinds of books and they'll think, oh, I really want to do that. So if you read widely, that will help you decide what kind of things that you want to do and what kind of things you might be good at. You've got to love writing, I suppose. That's the bottom line. The thing about writing isn't just the physical thing about putting the words onto the paper. It's, for me anyway, it's about finding a way of putting what's in your head onto the page so that somebody else who's reading the page can feel what was in your head. And that's not always easy to do. It's kind of like a puzzle. Writers often talk about these stories that they have created, which they describe as being like cathedrals in their mind, and like, I don't know, like a shed on the like a shed on paper. But there's that skill is very hard to come by, but it's great if you can do it, or if you can do it a little bit. But if you enjoy doing it, I suppose that's the key, because if you like to do that kind of thing, to turn what's in there onto paper so that somebody else can feel what you're feeling, it can be the best feeling in the world if you get it right. And you won't always get it right, and I almost never get it right. If you can get it right, 10% of the time even in one novel, then you're doing really well. Yeah, so those are the qualities. And the reason I say you've got to love doing it is that if you love writing and that you choose writing as a career, then you'll never feel like you're working for a living. You'll always feel like you're doing your hobby or your passion or your love. And it will never feel like work. And that's the thing which will sustain you into a long career, because you never feel like you're working. Then you'll do it, without hesitation and without any complaint. Write something, write an essay, write a novel, write a short story, send it off, get people to read it. No formal qualifications, but do read widely and try your best to use words that you wouldn't ordinarily use, particularly in the writing process. You don't have to use them in your ordinary speech, but when people read fiction, they are expecting to read things which move them. How long is a piece of string? You can earn nothing, or you can earn 20 million pounds. If you've written a great story, your career prospects can be fantastic, because once you've secured a publishing deal from a publisher, two things happen. The first is that they want you to carry on writing. And I didn't know this. When I sold my first book, I assumed that they'd buy that book and that would be the end of it. And nobody would want to hear from me again. But their kind of starting position is, if you've written a book, they want, and the industry as a whole wants, you to carry on writing. And I don't know why that is, but it's a nice position to be in. So once you get that first publishing deal, yes, your prospects are good in the sense that you can probably carry on writing. It might not pay you as much as you want it to, but it can. And if you're careful about the way you approach it, it can. So, for example, my debut, so it was published across different formats: a hardback, paperback, audio, and ebook. So that's quite good because it's lots of income streams. But then you can also get further income streams when your agent sells what they call the foreign rights. So the Italians might decide to do an Italian translation of it, and when they do, they might pay you, let's say, £5,000 for the privilege of writing your book in Italian. But that model will apply across the whole of the world, really. So you can have a Japanese version or a Czech version, or name the country that there can be a version, and each one of those can generate some income. You can also sell the TV rights if it's something which is capable of being made into a film or into a TV show. Then you can sell what's called the option, which is it's a legal term, which means that a producer has the contractual choice to make that thing, your book, your novel, into a TV series. So in my first novel, I sold the option for that to a production company. They don't always end up making it. In most cases, when an option is purchased by a TV production company, the book isn't made, in fact, because that process itself is quite difficult. It involves getting what's called a green light, which really means that a channel needs to buy it and agree to fund the making of it. That's the green light. And once they do that, then it gets made. But the point is that you can sell the options. So you can sell a TV production company the opportunity to make it. And that option is usually for a limited period, let's say 18 months. And they might pay you £10,000 or £15,000 or £20,000 for the option. Once it expires, once that 18 months is over, then they have to renew their option, and they'd have to pay you again another £10,000. And if they don't, then somebody else might option it. So that's another potential income stream. And if it does get made, then they'll pay you a further tranche of money. And again, we're not talking about millions, but a good enough sum to help you sustain a career. So you might have, because you won't have one of those not every book will produce a TV show, but maybe 1 in 10 might. Well, different types of writing. You can become a screenwriter, you can write journalistic pieces in newspapers, opinion pieces, you can become a blogger. There is no career which gives you more freedom than writing. Well, writing can be a very personal experience, but don't let the fact that it is personal put you off from sharing your work. If you want to be a writer, you've really got to get over that, because if a publisher takes it on, then it could be 1 million people reading your book. So don't be shy of letting people read your work, and particularly other writers. If you can go on Twitter, find another writer and get them to look at your work and read your work, then that's probably the best thing that you can do.